Abraham Lincoln became the 16th President of America on the 4th of March 1861. This was a very troubled period in American history. The issue of slavery had divided the country and split the two major political parties, the Whigs and the Democratic Party. Lincoln had recently become leader of the newly emerging Republican Party. First, to take a brief look at his background. Abraham Lincoln was born on the 12th of February 1809. His father Thomas was a poor farmer who moved from Kentucky to Indiana when Lincoln was about 9 years of age. They moved again to Illinois about 10 years later, and at this point Lincoln left the family home to begin work in a local general store in a small town, New Salem in Sangamon County. Throughout his childhood, Lincoln rarely attended school. His mother, Nancy, died when he was 9 years of age. His father, Thomas, then married Sarah Johnston, who encouraged young Abraham to read and write. As a young man, he read books like the Bible, Shakespeare, and the Pilgrim's Progress, and developed a system of self-education. By his early 20s, he began reading law books and qualified as a lawyer at the age of 27. He also became a champion wrestler, joined the local militia when the Black Hawk War broke out, and got elected as a Whig Party member to represent Sangamon County in Illinois State Legislature at the age of 25 in the year 1834. Lincoln served as a member of the Illinois State Legislature from 1834 until the mid-1840s. He was concerned with issues such as the development of roads, canals, bridges, and railroads. He argued strongly on occasion for all forms of internal improvements which could increase the transportation system and efficiency of the Illinois economy. By 1846, he was selected to run for the United States House of Representatives for a single term. As a congressman, Lincoln became a member of a number of committees dealing with internal improvements to the economy and especially in relation to improvements to his home state of Illinois. As a congressman in the late 1840s, when the Mexican-American War broke out, Lincoln objected to President Polk's aggressive stance in relation to the conduct of the war. He demanded that the president should prove his claim that the first blood shed in the war was spilled on American soil, as the president claimed. Lincoln's bills, known as the spotty resolutions, were largely ignored by the president and also by Congress. They did demonstrate, however, Lincoln's moral character. However, this was a time of American expansionism and most people ignored Lincoln's concerns, and he became a largely forgotten one-term congressman between 1847 and 49. Many people believed at this point that his political career was over. In regard to his personal life, just a brief note. Lincoln married Mary Todd in 1842. They had 4 children. One son, Robert, became Secretary of War in the Garfield administration 50 years later. Various accounts of the Lincoln marriage have been recorded, from that of devoted couple to a marriage that was largely in continuous conflict. However, back to his political career. By the early 1850s, Lincoln's interest in politics was reignited with the passing of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in May 1854. Lincoln did not immediately react to this act, but 5 months later, on the 16th of October 1858, he made a speech in Peoria, which effectively relaunched his political career. The Peoria speech was regarded as a turning point in his life, and some would say for the country as well. In it, Lincoln set out his objections to the new act, which proposed to allow slavery to spread northwards to Kansas and Nebraska if the people in that area so decided. This represented a considerable change, in fact a complete break with the Mousiori Compromise, which had held North and South together for the previous 30 or 40 years in regard to no slavery north of the 3630 parallel. Lincoln said that the new act was contrary to the Declaration of Independence, contrary to the Northwest Ordinance, and contrary to the intentions of the Founding Fathers. They merely tolerated slavery where it already existed, but never intended it to spread in the North and Western territories. Lincoln was keenly aware of the economic and race elements at play in the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Small white settlers wanted the new territories to be split into small farms of 150 to 200 acres that they could afford to buy. They resented the idea of the territories being split into huge ranches or plantations, which would require thousands of slaves to be transported from the south to cultivate. Peoria is a small town about 70 miles north of Springfield, where Lincoln lived in the early 1850s. By this time, he was in his mid-40s and had become a prosperous lawyer representing various companies like railway companies. He had also represented a number of clients in the Illinois Supreme Court, so Lincoln was quite a successful lawyer at this stage. However, his political career had ground to a halt somewhat, but as an ex-congressman, Lincoln's Peoria Speech warned of the issue of slavery creating violence in both Kansas and beyond, and the transportation of slaves could one day lead to the illegal importation of slaves from Africa being struck down by the Supreme Court, Lincoln strongly implied. Lincoln's Peoria Speech, which lasted almost 3 hours, was reported widely throughout the nation and made him something of a national figure. It also set down the basic principles of the newly formed Republican Party. In the following years, violence did flare up as Lincoln predicted in the Kansas region and beyond. The best known incident was where John Brown led an anti-slavery rebellion at Harper's Ferry in West Virginia in October 1859, which was basically a prelude to the Civil War. The 1850s also witnessed the emergence of the Republican Party, which combined the anti-slavery wings of both the Democratic and Whig Party, plus the recently formed Free Soil Party. At Peoria, Lincoln set down the basic principles of republicanism. The new party nominated John C. Fremont in the 1856 election. Lincoln was not known or well enough established to run for the presidency at this point. However, Fremont was defeated by James Buchanan in the election of November 56. Lincoln joined the Republican Party in 1856 and won a seat in the Illinois legislature. However, he refused to accept the seat and instead challenged Senator Stephen Douglas for a Senate seat in Congress. The Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858 drew huge national attention as slavery was the central issue. Lincoln argued against Stephen Douglas's concept of popular sovereignty and also against the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. He claimed both were contrary to the wishes of the Founding Fathers. Douglas accused Lincoln of promoting unconstitutional ideas contrary to the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. Lincoln in turn demanded to know if popular sovereignty could work both ways, could work in reverse. In other words, could people of a territory make laws which would outlaw slavery or make it difficult to operate? In response, Douglas outlined what was known as the Newport Doctrine, which demonstrated that slavery would be allowed to be made illegal, but this destroyed Douglas's Southern Democratic base. However, in the election of 1860, Lincoln won the actual election because of his basic principles of republicanism as outlined in Peoria. Lincoln's election caused the immediate secession of seven southern states. South Carolina was the first to leave in December 1860. It was followed in the early part of 1861 by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. In February 1861, the Confederate Constitution was agreed. Jefferson Davis, as a former Secretary of War, was agreed as the provisional president of the new Confederacy. Lincoln's inaugural speech in March 1861 dealt with both the issues of slavery and the Union. He said he had no plans or desire to abolish slavery in states where it already existed, but also insisted that he would not accept secession from the Union. His mission was to save the Union. On April the 12th, 1861, southern states fired on Union troops at Fort Sumter, which began the Civil War. 3 days later, on April 15th, Lincoln called on the states to send a volunteer force of 75,000 men. This action, in effect, forced other states to take sides in regard to the issue. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee and North Carolina all joined the Confederacy, bringing the total number of states to 11, as opposed to 22 northern states. In June 1863, residents in western counties in Virginia did not wish to secede with the rest of the state. This part of Virginia was admitted to the Union in June 1863 as the state of West Virginia. In effect, Virginia split into 2 states as a result of the Civil War. 4 other slave states, basically Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri, remained with the Union, and this was crucial to the eventual Northern victory. In July 1861, the first battle of the Civil War took place. This was known as the Battle of Bull Run and took place at Manassas Junction in Virginia. General McDowell led the Union charge, but the soldiers were fresh recruits, poorly trained, and were defeated by the Southern forces. This was a major upset. It was believed by many Northern politicians, including Lincoln himself, that the war would last only a few months. After a few battles, superior Northern forces would defeat the South. The North had vastly superior forces, far greater industrial and armaments capacity, and a far greater population, plus 22 states on the northern side as opposed to 11 states in the South. However, the vast size of the South, Texas alone, for example, is bigger than most countries, and a number of different armies meant that it was very difficult for the North to achieve a comprehensive victory. In his inaugural address, Lincoln appealed to the South not to leave the Union, but events quickly moved beyond his control. As Commander-in-Chief, Lincoln played a central role in the conduct of the Civil War. He hired and fired army generals, he supervised the strategy and tactics of the war effort, and implemented a naval blockade of the South's trade. He also had to manage an uneasy combination of political forces of war Democrats and radical Republicans, difficult to please both. He suspended habeas corpus in Maryland. He also arrested thousands of Southern sympathizers and made huge financial funds available prior to congressional approval for the war effort. The president also displayed great diplomatic skill in relation to the Trent affair. Here, his main priority was to keep Britain out of the war. The US Navy captured 2 Confederate diplomats from the British royal ship, the Trent. The diplomats, James Mason and John Slidell, were bound for both Britain and France in order to seek recognition for the South as a southern independent country. Lincoln recognized the danger of Britain entering the war on the southern side and demanded that the diplomats be released and the entire affair diffused as soon as possible. Another example of his skill was in August 1861, General John C. Fremont, the former presidential candidate, was now a general. He issued a martial order freeing slaves in the rebel states. However, a few days later, Lincoln cancelled this order, and recruitment from several states like Kentucky and Missouri greatly increased as a result. Border slave states did not want to see slaves free, and Lincoln wanted to make sure to keep them on the Union side. Lincoln also monitored the progress of the war by studying daily reports by telegraph in the War Department. In January 1862, he sacked the War Secretary Simon Cameron and replaced him with a much more efficient Edwin Stanton. Lincoln and Stanton thereafter conducted a close relationship in the leadership of the war. Lincoln's war strategy involved 2 major priorities. One, to defend Washington, and secondly, to try and achieve a quick and decisive victory. He was successful in regard to the first, but less so in regard to a quick victory. The war, which was anticipated to last a few months and cost a few thousand lives, went on for 4 years and cost 620,000 lives in battle and disease in the camps. Over 1 million people died in total when displacement, starvation and chaos caused by the war is also included. In the early months of the war, Lincoln replaced General Winfield Scott with George McClellan. However, McClellan proved to be too slow and indecisive and was removed in mid-1862. John Pope then took over leadership of the Army of Virginia, but was defeated in the Second Battle of Bull Run in the summer of 1862. In September 62, Robert E. Lee's army invaded the north, but were defeated in the Battle of Antietam on the 17th of September. This was the first battle on Union soil and the deadliest single-day battle of the war. Over 22,000 men were dead or wounded or missing at the end of the day. It ended in a Union victory, however, and facilitated Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation shortly thereafter. Throughout 1863, Lincoln replaced a number of generals who proved to be too poor in battle tactics or too timid to follow up after important victories. The Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in states still in rebellion in January 1863. In the following 2 years, Union armies freed over 3 million slaves in the South. Thousands of freed slaves joined the Union Army in turn and contributed to the eventual Union victory. At Gettysburg, Lincoln made his greatest speech on 19th of November 1863 in the aftermath of a Union victory. He talked about liberty and equality for men in the new nation, and also Americans' leading role in the world in the future. Lincoln made Ulyses Grant Supreme Commander to coordinate a comprehensive campaign throughout 1864 and 65. He was re-elected in November 64 as a National Union candidate with Democrat Andrew Johnson as his running mate. The war was finally won when the South surrendered on the 9th of April 1865. Abraham Lincoln is regarded as an outstanding statesman who led the nation through the Civil War and preserved the Union. He also moved the country towards the abolition of slavery and modernized the economy. He was assassinated in the Ford's Theatre in Washington on the 15th of April 1865, just 6 days after General Robert E. Lee surrendered. Abraham Lincoln is often regarded by both historians and popular surveys as America's greatest president.